from this world. Running on a hamster wheel, but searching for something I can't feel. I just wanna be a lost girl and fly. Take a breath, feel my wings spread, levitate above the ground and make eye contact with clouds. Now I'm rising, I'm soaring above it all. I just wanna be free. Finally, I 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 always stay dreaming, never imagined I lose my spark. Living in this crazy time, putting back the pieces of my mind. I know how to run from the dark and fly. Take a breath, feel my wings spread, levitate into the clouds. I'm so high above the ground. I'm rising, I'm soaring above it all. I just wanna be free. Finally, I wanna be free.
Race, conversations, and law enforcement. This is Moses' People Speak. Why, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Moses People Speak. I'm your host, Terry Watson, and today we are discussing critical race theory. Again, a very hot topic these days, and I'm hoping to have a really good discussion about this. So if you are watching right now, go ahead, put in the chat box where you are watching from, and definitely like and share to get this conversation going. Before we get going, before we bring on our guests, I want to make a couple of announcements that is, to me, is very important, and we haven't been together in a while. So, the first announcement I want to make is, if you haven't seen the movie yet, the movie is called The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain. It is a fantastic movie. It really dives into the conversation about mental health, race, and law enforcement. Again, very important to our platform. I had a chance to watch it, and the one thing that I'm looking to do is take this film and see how we can use it for police training. So definitely, if you haven't watched it, it is in theaters. And if you remember, we had Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. on the show, as well as the director and the producer of the movie. So feel free to watch it in theaters, or you can watch it on any of the streaming platforms. The next thing I wanted to mention is I love to read, and so one of the books that is out is called Rockin' the Boat by Paul Wilson. If all goes well, Paul will be our next guest on Moses People Speak. This book is his own chronicles of being in law enforcement, so definitely order the book and check it out. If you've been paying attention, you would know that one of the things that happened recently was that we had 10 African-American female officers file a lawsuit in D.C. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because, we definitely support those sisters in their fight against racism and sexism. And so by all means, let's give a big support for our sisters in blue. And also, I'm going to keep an eye on this one because I want to see what changes in DC. So going on to our topic today, I want to bring up this one first because this is Dr. James Whitfield, who was a principal in Texas, and he was put on administrative leave because he was being accused of critical race theory. And again, that is the topic of today's discussion. If you do not know about critical race theory, it's something that has really been in the media as of lately. So I love everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. There were some great questions. Again, they range from law enforcement questions like, why do so many people think CRT is invalid? Can you talk about the intersection between CRT and law enforcement? Again, how can we debunk racist rhetoric and misinformation about CRT with fellow law enforcement officers? We also had some questions that really talked about how can we show support to people of color in regards to this topic. But today, what we're going to really dive into is how do we engage folks who may be closed-minded to having some civil discourse around this topic. So before we bring on our guests, let's take a quick look at what is happening with CRT around the country.
They're being encouraged to discriminate against each other. They're being encouraged to look at each other as oppressed or oppressor based on skin color. And this is no way to do education.
CRT is a very divisive and destructive theory. What it does is it turns people into either the oppressed or the oppressors.
It's called critical race theory, which tells us now that everyone is to be judged by the melanin content in their skin.
My brother, Dr. Dwayne Wright. Let me unmute you, my brother. There you go. How are you today?
I'm feeling good, Terry. I'm laughing at the introduction in the video, particularly the brother at the end, but we'll get into it all. How are you feeling?
You know what?
Shout out to State College. Hope everything's doing well in Happy Valley.
I'm doing well. We have a great conversation lined up today. I think I sent you some of the questions today. As you saw, they were very diverse questions. Really, people want to know, right? Because there's a lot of misinformation about critical race theory. And again, as we're speaking today, folks, if you have questions, please do put them in the chat box. I'm going to take a look at them and propose them to Dr. Dwayne as we are speaking today. But so first of all, Dr. Dwayne, again, first of all, welcome back. You are a first of now many. You were the first one to be live for SFJ and Most People Speak,
okay.
And you were now you're the first to come back as a past guest,
a returning champion, man. Terry, thank you. You know, and before we even dive into the topic, I must say that I'm honored to be here today. You know, all glory to God, of course, but thank you for the opportunity. But more importantly, thank you for what you're doing for the community. I think between the conversations we've had, you have done yeoman's work, a lot of it unpaid, volunteer hours that you could be dedicating to your craft, your occupation, on your family, that you put it into community. And, you know, I just wanted to say publicly how proud I am to be your friend and how much I appreciate the work that you do.
Well, I appreciate that, brother. I do. All right, so let's dive into this. Now, you know, I showed that short video, and again, that video really came from a perspective of that K-12 narrative, right? There are parents, there are school board meetings in which people were really getting that CRT. So first, let's talk about, you know, I know it's a very general question, but what is CRT, and what role does it play in those platforms like, you know, K-12 and higher ed and even law enforcement?
Yeah, well, Terry, first of all, again, thank you for having me here today, and thank you for being able to discuss and clarify such an important topic. How much time do we have? I think it's an hour scheduled for a show. That first question could be the entire hour-long answer, but I don't intend to have that. So I will say, my brother, please interject, interrupt. I'm going to go into a sort of explanation, but I want to focus this on the questions that you have, and of course, the questions of your audience. So first, let me answer the question this way. The CRT that I'm about to explain plays a very pivotal role in academia, in legal research and education research, but it is in no way relevant to the arguments that we're having today. I think the forces that be have created a boogeyman, a straw man, if you wish, and that CRT we'll talk about, but might be a little different than the CRT I'm explaining right now. So first and foremost, CRT is a lens. It's an academic lens at which to look at race and racism. It is critical because it's a critique of the way things are right now. It's a theory because it's an explanation of a phenomenon. In academia, we have several explanations of phenomenon. If I take up this pen and I throw this pen, it comes back down, right? That's called the theory of gravity. right?
Right.
And in
Right.
academia, theories cannot be proven. They could just fail to be disproven. And no one has disproven the theory of gravity. We also have social theory, social cultural theory, which I use. And CRT is a social theory. It's an explanation for a phenomenon. And a phenomenon that it seeks to explain is racial inequality. CRT takes a certain vantage point when it comes to race and racism. First of all, it sees race as not biological, but a social construct, which means that we give it power and we give it symbolism. It is not about skin color, it's about the social sort of meaning that we give it. Secondly, it defines racism not on the individual level, but looks at institutional, systemic, and structural analysis. And I want to really hone in on this part of the definition because, Terry, I really think this is key, that a lot of people have been trained to think about racism as the sort of quote unquote bad apples theory, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you think that the problem with, police violence is about one officer, the George Floyd situation was about Derek Chauvin and now that he's convicted, problem over. You're just not a critical race theorist. I don't think you're a racist necessarily. You're just not a critical race theorist because critical race theory will say the problem is not with Derek Chauvin. The problem is with the institution, the police or, the police forces or police unions and the systems that those institutions make up. That's a simple answer. I'm more than happy to go into the origins of it, but I want to kick it back to you.
Yeah, and so you dive into something, and Dwayne, the work that I do with law enforcement and helping to explore that race concept and really where it fits in law enforcement. That one question I want to bring it back up on the screen. It asks, how do we debunk this racist rhetoric and misinformation about CRT with fellow law enforcement? Because I have a thought on that too, because of the story that I tell with, actually look at the Tapia Samuel battle with Moses P. Cobb. I actually tell the story of two African-American men who were in law enforcement and the story that they left behind and why that needs to be evaluated when you're looking at policing. But I would love to get your point of view on that. Again, I'll put a question back up there too, is how should one debunk racist rhetoric and misinformation about CRT, especially with law enforcement?
So I think there are a lot of dimensions to this answer, right? I think first and foremost, it's very hard to convince a racist not to be a racist, right? And not all police officers are racist. In fact, if I had to do a little conjecture, I would say the majority aren't, definitely not intentionally. But there are some people that you're just not going to get to. And I know that wasn't the spirit that the question was asked. So I want to just, sort of separate those that we aren't going to get to from the conversation so we don't spend any emotional weight or waste any time trying to convince people that because of the color of your skin, you're inferior, that's not true, right? So I think the real question is, how do we debunk the racist rhetoric and misinformation amongst people that are willing to actually have it debunked amongst themselves? I think first and foremost, we tell the truth. I think one of the most dangerous things that's going on with the bans on CRT is that it seeks to impose in the future of the country amongst our children and amongst our teachers an incorrect and inaccurate and quite frankly very biased view of history. All right. Like most people in the United States, frankly, aren't lawyers, right? There are about 328 million people in this country, believe it or not. We have about 1.3. It was a little less after COVID that are lawyers. So we're talking about less than 1%, right? So, CRT was originally developed within law school, right? I'll get back to the law enforcement part of it, but this is really important that it started not with Black people, but it started in the early 1900s with a person really named Oliver Wendell Holmes. And you might know him, Terry. He's the one that said you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, which is inaccurate. First Amendment, you don't have to worry about that.
That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, it's a whole other conversation. That the life of the law is about experience and not about logic. And what he was actually facing is against legal formalists, right? And legal formalists think that the law is like math, that politics doesn't affect the law. The person passing the law doesn't matter. The person enforcing the law as the officers, the identity doesn't matter. Law is law. Law is like silence. And the legal realists, led by Oliver Wendell Holmes and others, came along and said that was not true in the early 1900s. Those legal realists were put into power during the Great Depression by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his sort of cadre of people. And they represented people like, Justice Benjamin Cardozo and others. Fast forward to the 1960s, we have the critical legal studies, right? And critical legal studies could have been called critical occupation theory or critical class theory, because there had been a little time since the World War II, our fear of communism had gone away, and they, not critical race theorists, injected a Marxist sort of advertly left type of thinking, and this was represented by people like Duncan Kennedy and Roberto Unger. And it wasn't until the 1980s where the critical legal studies people said, look, law is not just impacted by the law, but the person adjudicating it, the judge, and the people in power actually have it as well. And a critical race theorist says, okay, we see you, a critical realist. We see you, critical legal studies. We're going to raise you one better. Law is interjected by politics. The identity of the judge and the enforcer matter, but race matters as well. Right. So how do we debunk the information amongst law enforcement? I think law enforcement needs to know the origins of critical race theory. They need to know exactly what it says. And here's the thing, and really the key theory, they don't need to agree with it. Right. If you believe that the problem is a bad apples type of problem, if you just remove the racist, everything goes right, you're just simply not a critical race theorist. However, I would say, and your audience has a lot of law enforcement, I understand, any beat cop understands that crime is not a matter of bad apples. You arrest one drug dealer, whether it be white, black, Chinese, doesn't matter. There's another one that comes and replaces them. Why? Because crime is a problem of poverty in the streets, right? And that it's a systemic and institutional problem, and even be a cultural problem, and not just a bad apple one. So I say you debunk the myth by saying exactly what CRT is and trying to educate people on the truth.
That's a really good leeway to my next question, bro. I think that I showed that video right just now, and one of the things that you saw was a lot of emotion, right? And that was sort of, there obviously is misinformation, right? But what happens is with that information that they have, they become very, very emotional how they express it. So my question is, looking at where we are as a country, especially with, race or racism, how do we get past that emotion piece to actually begin to dive into a new consciousness?
Well, first, I don't think we should get past it. I think we need to know how to deal with it, right? I think if the question is, how do you get past emotion, I don't think you're ever going to really get past it. One of the things that I don't want to say the right or the left, because I think that's a little pejorative, but the anti-racism crowd has tried to do is they've tried to scare particularly white suburban moms that CRT is coming for their children and going to make their children feel bad about themselves, right? So they say, well, CRT is making our children lose innocence, right? And I say to myself, well, black children never have innocence. Look up. The audience can Google the name Tamir Rice, young boy playing the toy gun that was seen as a grown man as old as you and I. They say, well, it won't make our kids feel good. Well, Terry, there was a lot of history that I read. And my, K through 12 education, my undergrad education didn't make me feel good. But with that said, I know two wrongs don't make a right. So we need to acknowledge that at the heart of hearts, you got people that just want to do what's best for their kids. You understand? Maybe, they're mistaken. Maybe they're drunk off white privilege. We can go there if we want, but at the heart of hearts, they're just trying to do what's best for their kids. And we need to make it known that we're just trying to do what's best for your kids too, by teaching accurate history, by teaching accurate education. And that's all CRT says to do. It says, if you buy into the theory that if you want to teach that America is a colorblind, sort of race neutral society, the facts just haven't brought that out. So rather than teaching the society that we want to live in, like a Disney fantasy, let's teach the society that we actually are living in the hope that the next generation could be a little better than ourselves and can actually put us in the situation that a lot of people say they want us to be and a lot of people want us to live, right now. So I think part of getting out the emotion is letting people know we're not coming for your kids. In fact, we're trying to help your kids. We're trying to give them the best education possible.
Yeah, it's sad that going through college. I mean, I think that let's say, for example, Juneteenth is a great example. I didn't learn about Juneteenth into grad school, and that's to me is unacceptable in a society that teaches history.
Unacceptable. Well, I'll tell you one better, Terry. So I am a multi-graduate of Penn State University. I graduated from Brooklyn Technical High School. Shout out to Brooklyn, one of the best high schools in America in New York City and one of the most diverse districts. And I went to an HBCU. And not only Juneteenth, I hadn't heard of CRT until I got into law school. Didn't hear it in high school. Didn't hear it at my HBCU in undergrad. I didn't learn about it till I got to law school. And even then, I was at Penn State, as you know, for 6 years. I got 3 degrees from Penn State. I think there was a class at the end at Penn State Law. Dickinson was always doing different things. Shout out to Dickinson Law, doing great things. But I think there was a class at the end of Penn State Law that I wasn't able to take because I was getting a dual degree. And even as progressive as the education school was, and shout out to Dean Lawless, who's doing great things there as well, I went through 6 years of being active around the College of Education in Penn State, and there was not one course directly on CRT. So, not just from a conservative lens, if you're in the school in the South, but even from a progressive lens in our schools in Chicago and New York City, we're not talking and giving accurate history. So, I think the attack and the backlash on CRT is the fear that we would actually do that. Oh my God, my kid is going to come home and ask, Mommy, what have you done to fight racism? I don't want that.
Well, what's interesting is I have a unpublished op-ed. It's still in my doc here. I write something usually and then decide if I want to send it off to be published. But I was responding to critical race theory just on the height of the conflict, and I was trying to address this concept of guilt, we're trying to look at specifically K-12, right? Looking at, all right, my kid's going to come home and they feel guilty about learning something about critical race theory in school. And my response to that was, well, if you are teaching them at home, they shouldn't feel guilty in the first place. So hear me out. So I love history. I like to read about history. One of the things that I did a talk not so long ago, and Abraham Lincoln came up. Right. At this time, people were calling him a white supremacist. And then how can you call Abraham Lincoln a white supremacist when he, sort of freed the slaves, right? We'll put that in quotations. Now, here's my response to that, and I stand with this, is if you look at the story of Abraham Lincoln, his story is how you can progress. Not he wasn't a savior. He was the one that said that he doesn't believe the black and the white race is equal. He's the one that said that he want Africans to go back to Africa. It wasn't until his interaction with folks like Frederick Douglass, who kept pushing and pushing and pushing. That's do you see what I'm saying?
That's so true. But I'll tell you one different, Terry. From another perspective, Abraham Lincoln's evolution and transition can be seen through a critical race theory lens as just another example of what the late, great Derek Bell called interest convergence theory. And interest convergence theory says the issues, the hopes, the dreams, the political and policy ambitions of minoritized individuals only get advanced when they converge or buy into the interests of the majority. Abraham Lincoln, and I'm teaching, just history at this point. I'm not a teacher professor, but I could, give this as a little bit of a story. Did not want to free the slaves at first. He wanted to preserve the Union.
Right.
And it wasn't until he needed to free the slaves in an act to further his first interest of preserving the Union did freedom for the slavery even become a mantle for the Civil War. You understand? And interest convergence as a concept that comes out of CRT, along with other concepts like intersectionality, sort of highlight and illustrate a way that we can explain more accurate history. That does not mean that I want to rename Abraham Lincoln High School, in New York City. That doesn't mean that I want to take down statues of Abraham Lincoln or the Lincoln Memorial here. I just think let's be accurate.
Yes.
Let's tell the history as it is, not in an effort to feel bad about ourselves, but in an effort to be better in the future.
And honestly, if you tell it the way, like as we're just saying it right now, to me, that speaks more to the American progression than this ideology of having this great man.
A more perfect union.
Yeah.
Completely thriving, the Tocqueville, all that stuff. And I'll give a shout out. I'll give a shout out to someone that's teaching right now at Penn State. My Waterbury professor and chair, Francisco Lopez, who has written on this in the K through 12. I'll give a shout out to your young lady that's working at George Washington University, where I teach, Professor Christine Nagana, who is doing good work on this because, we do need to cite our women of color. So I want to just give a shout out to where, as I can speak on this. If you're really looking at it, look at the work of those two as well.
Yes, and so actually, you had a chance to interact with Kate, and Kate, thanks you for tuning in. She asked another question here. Can you give more examples of interest convergence in today's environment?
I can give a lot of examples. I'll give several examples. They all won't be from the racial context, right? Because critical race theory has produced a lot of offshoots. So what I explained was that critical race theory is a lens on viewing race. It's an explanation for a phenomenon. That's what all theories are. It explains racial inequalities. It has several offshoots, like LatCrit, where it explains racial inequalities as it opposed to our immigrant population, specifically those that are represented by Latinos, or Latinx people. It has queer theory, critical Black feminism, et cetera, et cetera. I'll give maybe 2 or 3 more examples for interest convergence. From one perspective, the election of Barack Obama can be seen as an interest convergence. Whereas Black people might have voted for the first Black president, I'm sure a lot of white people voted for the first Black president as well to feel better about themselves. And we saw that in the many, many think pieces and op-eds that declared us a post-racial country, which was proven false because we had Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown and everything right after Barack Obama. And Richard Delgado, one of the godfathers of critical race theory, has written exactly that article, Obama as Interest Convergence. I'll give you another one. Perhaps, gay marriage as an interest convergence. Whereas you were able to expand the concept of marriage to LGBT people, the majority got their benefit from it, particularly the white Christian middle class majority. Instead of attacking the benefits that they got for the traditional concept of the couple they called marriage, they expanded it to further minorize people. You understand? And it's kind of just ironic in this country that we had same-sex marriage before we had protections for work people for LGBT. After Obergefell, in certain states, it's not the way it is right now, thank God, you could have gotten married on Monday and fired for it on Tuesday. I'll give one more example. How about, our immigration policy as an interest convergence? I can't tell you how, somehow the right has got us. I didn't say the right, but I'll put it this way. The right has got us convinced that, it's liberals or liberalism that benefits the most from untapped immigration or immigration. No, who benefits the most? The people who aren't paying workers in the South to pick, cotton and fruit, the people that are paying people under the table below a minimum wage for the immigration policy. So the few immigration laws that we can and we do have, you understand, can be seen as an interest convergence. A lot of things can be seen as interest convergence. And to be quite frank, to answer Kate's question, any theory is not without its critiques. A shout out to Brother Justin Driver, who's a Yale law professor, African-American male, that has critiqued interest convergence theory. But, as much as his critiques, I still buy into it. I have not seen proof. Remember when I say theory can it could just be disproven? I have not seen any credible evidence that can disprove to me that in America, the interests of the majority, the interests of the minority, are only advanced when they converge with the interests of the majority.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you dived into another question that I did not put up on the screen. One of our guests asked this question is how does CRT address the Afghan population, if at all? And again, we typically do not talk about immigration policy when we talk about race. But they're
insane, right?
right.
We had racial quotas in immigration policy even after we passed the 14th Amendment to the Constitution.
Exactly.
But so this is a really interesting question because it implicates not just race, but it implicates religion. We are a white-dominated society. We are a society dominated by Christians of all colors here in America. Again, critical race theory it critiques the current state of affairs. It's an explanation for a phenomenon of racial inequality. There is massive racial inequality today in our immigration system. Not just the fact that Donald Trump called certain, I'm sorry. My mother told me not to mention the president. Not the fact that certain people called certain countries, quote unquote, S-hole countries. Not the fact that we saw cowboys just in the last 2 weeks chasing black people who happen to be from a different country at the border. Our immigration policies have also always advanced white people with money. You understand? So the question is, if you typically, Terry, I went to school at HBCU in the South, and we there's a lot of rigor going down there. But one thing they teach you is if you break it, you bought it. We went into Afghanistan. We went there to take out Osama bin Laden, and Osama bin Laden was then found in Pakistan. You understand? And we broke it. And the question is, now that we've got there, why aren't we willing to actually fix it? We have abandoned Afghan, and I don't know why. I think the critical race lens will say, well, they're not white. If we had gone in to save France from the Nazis and it was that situation, would we be, turning away French European refugees right now? I don't know. From a critical race lens, we'd say probably not. You know what I'm saying? And then think about our defense of women's rights. You understand? And the amount of women that we have abandoned in Afghanistan, would we have done that? I'll give you one more, and it goes a little bit off Afghanistan, but it should tell the critical race theory point. I, like a lot of Americans, have been transfixed with the recent disappearance, and unfortunately she was found, of Gabby, I think her name was Patino.
Yes.
You understand? And that was a unfortunate situation, and I hope that young man who may be responsible is caught. But I just read something out of Black Enterprise magazine that said that there are about 2 or 3 Black women and girls that go missing every day that never get the sort of outreach and support to got found missing like Gabby got. And the question is, again, critical race theory is an explanation for inequality, right? What explains that inequality? Is Gabby just a fine looking person and our Black girls aren't? Probably not. You understand? Did Gabby Patino's family have a certain amount of money and they were able to pay reporters? From my understanding, no. Could it be that as a society, even unintentionally, we value white women just a little, and particularly white girls, just a little bit more than Black women and Black girls? Critical race theory is a theory that says we should do that. We should investigate how our laws, even though they may be race neutral, naturalizes, constructs, and justifies racial inequality.
Yeah, that's when that story first came across my timeline, and again, I don't watch a lot of TV, so I once in a while I might turn on the TV and CNN or Fox, whatever. I might turn it on, and voila, I looked at my wife and said, who is this person? And why is she getting so much coverage? I thought maybe she was like a diplomat, you know how you get diplomats. And I'm like, maybe she's a diplomat. I couldn't.
And to be clear, Terry, I'm not saying that's not a tragedy. I'm not saying I'm not happy for the coverage because we were able to find her remains, and we need to find the alleged criminal that killed her and brought to justice. I'm just saying that if Black Enterprise magazine is to be believed, they are a Black Gabby every day that we don't, as a society, invest the same energy in finding. And critical race theory just asks the question, why?
Yep. So let me ask you another question, and with critical race theory, and I'll take this question down. But this is nothing new, right? This has been around for decades, like you mentioned before.
More than a decade, really.
More than that.
Derek Bell and Alan Freeman started this in the late 70s, early 80s, and then several students at Harvard, led by Kimberly Crenshaw, who gave critical race theory their name. This is Derek Bell's book right here, Race, Racism, and American Law. Shout out to Professor Victor Romero, who gifted me this when I graduated in 2015 from Penn State Law. Derek Bell, they went to learn under Derek Bell. And by that time, Derek Bell had said, listen, y'all ain't hiring black people. I ain't going to be here. And they organized a seminar, which they named Critical Race Theory. So this has been going on, well, longer than I've been born, bro. Maybe longer than you have. I ain't going to call you out and try to age you.
Generational test here. So let me ask you, it's nothing new, but why is it so in our face in the media today? Like, what do you think is so, I hate the word attractive, but what do you think is so, like, when I looked at critical race theory in media to prepare for this, I was flooded with videos and articles, and it was just, like in the past year, it's been in local government, it's been in school boards, it's been just everywhere. Why do you think that is?
So, Terry, I sent you a couple of links. If we can go ahead and send the audience link A, and I just want to uplift the work of Professors Kevin Brown and Professor DJ Jackson, who's out of the University of Wyoming, believe it or not, School of Law, a black brother out there in Wyoming doing really good work. And I just want to put that link out there. This is a short article that talks about the history of CRT, and it's probably one of the most comprehensive articles that I've ever seen, even more than anything that I've written on it. Why now is the question, though. And the audience is free to click on link A and do your research. Don't believe me. You can believe these other people. Why now? I think, so there's an obvious answer, there's a cynical answer, and then there is, an answer in between. Let me give the obvious answer. I think the obvious answer is it's a backlash to what we saw last summer, George Floyd.
Yeah,
you understand, and the work that activists actually did to put together and kind of do things that said that we would not take it anymore. We are not going to continue this work. And, we have seen, talk about interest convergence. The other concept that comes from CRT is sort of the permanence of racism. And it doesn't mean that America is inherently racist. It means as designed, America will be racist until we actually decide to change, right? And I think that this backlash is at the fear of change. I think a lot of people are saying, oh my God, the young people are in the streets of all different colors, creeds, and races. Even people that would consider themselves conservative got up and said George Floyd should never happen again. And I think, the people who are, again, anti-racist say that, okay, this can't continue. Maybe we've lost this generation. What can we do to ensure that the next generation will not react to the next George Floyd incident as this generation did? There must be something going on in the schools. Let's cut it. Let's fix it. Right. The more, sort of cynical answer is, I think some people are trying to test out wedge issues that may work. It doesn't take a political scientist to understand that the reason the Republican Party did not win the last election was because they lost the suburbs. All right. And this particular critical race theory issue is meant to target specifically white, working class, and upper middle class women who care, as they should, more than anything else for their children. And it's trying to say this activity, this group, this political party, this movement is coming for the one thing you care about the most, your children. It's trying to make them feel bad about themselves. It's trying to tell them that they're inherently evil, and it's taking some of their time. Now, this is not a new tactic, by the way. I could put out words like Ebola and Benghazi and death panels that were trying to derail other policy issues. But I'll tell you what, Terry, this is not even the first time they've used critical race theory. Many of you might not know the name Lonnie Ganor. Lonnie Ganor was the first tenured African-American female professor at Harvard. It was the reason that Derek Bell left Harvard was to protest that we had not hired an African-American or really woman of color. And, Harvard is still not tenuring people. Just look up Professor Garcia Pena and Harvard. Your audience can Google that. But Lonnie Ganor, when Bill Clinton was elected in 92, was up for a position in the government. And would you know that the reason that the first Black female tenured professor at Harvard Law School was not given that job was because of her connection to critical race theory? I'll give you another one because you'll remember this, Terry. How about the OJ trial? Somehow, some way, critical race theory was blamed for OJ getting off. They said that, the jury was somehow reading critical race theory, which at the time maybe had 4 or 5 articles published, and the reason that they said not guilty OJ was not because they looked at the evidence. It was not because they had already experienced Rodney King and didn't trust the police. Trusting the police is crucial, but because of critical race theory. So while this is not new, I think that the election and the backlash and the fact that part of the turning point in the election was white women from the suburbs, they thought that this would be a good way to have a wedge issue and say, don't vote for President Biden, don't vote for people like AOC. They're following critical race theory, and critical race theory is doing X, Y, and Z to your kids. It's all lies, as I hope the links in this conversation will explain. But if you want to know, that's why I think it's happening right now.
You shared with us a piece about why you think it's under attack. Like, when I look at critical race theory, and anytime that is sort of brought up, there is an attack there. If it's not, I think there was well, you can't say his name, but I can. President Trump administration put out but before he left office, he put out this report, if you remember, about that
1776 report,
1776 report,
19 report, and then an executive order banning critical race theory in all federal apartments. Yeah, I remember.
Yes. That was. And the work that I do, that was an eye-opening time for me, because I was like, well, if I had to ask the question where you stand after those two things coming out, you wouldn't have to ask that question. But with it being under attack, what could we do? And I think either as scholars or as folks who are community organizers, what could we do to, I guess, change that rhetoric and begin to...
That's such a good question. So first and foremost, I gave 4 links. If you could post the other 2, I think that would get a good started. One of them is sort of an explanation about the legal battles that are coming up. The other, and I think this is really important, is a debate between Rutgers law professors and a teacher about CRT. And it goes into the first thing that I think your audience and anyone else will need to do on this issue. Get educated. You don't have to take Dr. Dwayne Wright's word for it, even though I'm glad that you're on here. Do your own research, get educated about these topics. I have been a little discouraged that some of my liberal friends, white, Black, Asian, or indifferent, have not really stepped up and defended CRT as much as I think they should. You understand? I would think that you would see some statements from law schools, maybe Penn State Law or other schools, saying, whether we support CRT is beyond the point, but you shouldn't be banning topics in school. It's the equivalent of burning books, and this is literally Fahrenheit 451, in living color. And I really do think, if you truly believe that we need an America that can be anti-racist, you need to be against the removal of anti-racist curriculum from the classroom. And that's what these bans of CRT are. It has nothing to do with CRT, as Dr. Dwayne Wright will teach it in his graduate courses. And I need people to mobilize and activate after they get educated. The other thing I think that people can do, and this will be a little political, I would love to see parents on the other side of this issue mobilize as much as parents that are against CRT. I'm always discouraged where, I go to these board meetings and, there are parents there and, they're crying these, what I would call crocodile tears. And there's not a robust voice for parents on the other side saying, no, I refuse to let my kids' education get watered down. You understand? These debates are not new, Terry. You can go back to the debates between creationism and evolution. And, the science said evolution, and there's a certain cadre that wanted to teach creationism. When people said, no, we compete as Americans on the global stage, please keep politics out of our education. It's so ironic that people saying that CRT puts politics in education, but when you're banning subjects, you understand? And it's the same people that just 3-4 months ago were crying real tears about cancel culture that now wants to cancel CRT. It's beyond me. But I really do think that, educate yourself, mobilize, and then show up at these board meetings, show up at events like this, take this information, share the video, share the links, and get, educated and active to fight back against this. Because the same way that the right wants you to think that CRT is coming for their kids, their bans are coming for your kids. You understand? Yeah. What they want is a world in which, based on freedom of speech, and we'll talk about that a little bit, Tommy can use the N-word against his friend Deshaun in the classroom in a higher education class, but we can't teach Tommy and Deshaun the history of the N-word.
Yeah.
That is the world.
Yeah.
A very uneducated, ignorant world that they want to interject on your kids that need to compete on the global stage. And if you're a parent and that shocks you, I think you should mobilize to fight against it, not against it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I really, and I love what you're saying too, Dwayne, especially when we talk about trying to mobilize in the schools. Like, I think the one thing that people tend to do is, if there is not choose a side and be neutral. Mm-hmm. Right.
They think silence is neutral, right? And always,
yeah.
Back to the old, activism of ACT UP, in the AIDS crisis, silence is death. Silence is not neutral. Capitulation in the face of injustice is the support of injustice. And yes, that might be heavy. That might mean that, in between the soccer practice and everything else that you're doing in this crazy neoliberal capitalistic world, that you have to actually attend a meeting. That might mean that your cousin who's placing disinformation on Facebook, you might actually have to, put a link maybe to this event to dissuade them from passing that information. And that might make Thanksgiving dinner a little uncomfortable. But here's the thing. Before we get to actual comfortability, rather than fantasy, you got to move through being uncomfortable. There is no way around it. There is no way to a post-racial America without some type of sacrifice and some type of uncomfortability. And that, more than anything else, is what these bans on CRT are trying to do.
Yeah. I love that comment there.
I tried. I tried. I'm trying.
So I'm people who know me about my views on politics. I typically like to. I don't avoid politics, but I speak to both. And matter of fact, Dwayne, the first time you was on this platform, you were talking about sort of the how there's this. When you look at sort of the incidents that were taking place over 2020, the calling of the cops on Black men, there's a concept that liberals were making these phone calls, and Amy was actually a liberal. And so we talk about the hypocrisy and looking at politics and race. But one of the things that I try to make sure I make clear is I'm always critical of any president. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, because that's what being a American is. You always should be critical of your government, and again, in order to make sure that they're doing what it's supposed to do, but also that you are, as Barack was saying, in this case, or any president should say, moving towards a more perfect union. You can't do that if you're not being critical. So here's my, and I'm looking at the time, brother, and we still got a good crowd hanging with us like we did last time. But I want to ask you this really deep question: is what role do you think critical race theory plays in America? Like, what, we talked about in the concept of law enforcement, we talked about it in higher ed, but what role do you think it plays in America?
So first and foremost, not enough. That if you truly, and again, let me just say it again, if you truly believe the problems with race in America are bad apples, and we need to just get rid of the racist, right? And this is the concept of critical race theory. A lot of parents are saying, my kid isn't a racist. he, she, or they are 12. They can't be a racist. Therefore, why do they need to hear about this? When they do something racial,
Right.
then maybe we can actually teach them something about CRT. And that's first of all very reductive, and it's not proactive, and it's also not true because again, CRT is not attacking individuals. It does not take individual analysis. It teaches analysis at the level of institutions, structures, and systems. Right. So I think right now in America, even with a Democratic president, even in cities such as New York City, we just elected a former police officer. So your audience might like or not like this comment, Eric Adams. And in his statement, he said, I might bring back stop and frisk. And listen, Terry, I am a Black man that now has a doctorate and a JD. And I still walk the streets of New York City when I go back home with fear because of stop and frisk. Then I was stopped and frisked myself several times.
Yeah, me too.
Throughout my time within New York City. So I think that it doesn't play enough of a role. And, a lot of people just are uncomfortable talking about race. Maybe they have, mixed race families and they don't know how to react to it. They haven't had the opportunity to do the research. And I think we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So it doesn't play enough of a role. I think right now the role it could play and the role it should play is to let America know how far we really need to go, even in a post-Obama, post-Trump era, that we are still at the point where we're talking about racism in the schools, not talking about solutions to racism in the schools. We're at a point where we're attacking concepts like action civics, which actually, instead of teaching the kids in K through 12 schools boring social studies, you put them in a situation and they're living social studies. And CRT bans are being roped in to banning action civics. We're still talking about whether we should have culturally responsive pedagogy in schools, not what it is, not holding our teachers responsible for actually being culturally responsive when they're teaching, but whether we should have it. So the fact that we're having a CRT discussion, I think the role that it should play is to let people know that we still have a lot of work to do. Just because we elected Barack Obama doesn't mean we're post-racial. I think that's fairly obvious. But just because President Biden was elected doesn't mean that the fight is over. The fight is still there. We have a court that's stacked against progressive issues. I think I could say that. Affirmative action might not be around. I'll throw out a controversial one. We saw a state, for the last 3 weeks, give the state the power to tell a woman what to do with their body. The same state that says the state doesn't have power to give people mask mandates. The hypocrisy is ironic, but I'm just saying that, far more than race. The situation where we're at is work still needs to be done. And where it starts is in our classrooms, our K through 12 classrooms, our undergraduate classrooms, our graduate classrooms. Let's teach accurate history. Let's challenge our students to engage with these issues so that when they come out and they're your lawyers, your doctors, your sergeants, your police captains, you understand? They understand that, hey, I might have an implicit bias. Let me back up. That, I might be stopping this car not because I really think it's drug activity, but that, this person might be Black. Should I second guess that? Should I second think that? And that's the world that these anti-racists don't want you to live in. They want a world that preserves, quite frankly, white supremacy and anti-Black racism. And I'm not saying that intentionally. It may be that you want something that leads to that. Like you just don't want Tommy to feel bad. And listen to the thing. I don't want Tommy to feel bad either. But if it comes to Tommy feeling bad for a moment, an actual change in America, long lasting, I think that's an easy choice.
I think it is. For people don't know this, by the way, Dwayne, is that the questions I typically ask comes from other folks, right? And for these episodes, and when I saw that question pop in, it reminded me of a conversation I've had with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about the N-word because unfortunately it reared its ugly head. And I remember saying to this colleague that it's so important that white brothers and sisters get comfortable talking about racism to other white brothers and sisters, right? Yeah. Like you talk about the Thanksgiving table, right? And I remember after the election, Thanksgiving was happened right after that.
Yeah, 2 weeks after.
And at my Thanksgiving table, there was no contention. And please understand, my family, we have Democrats and Republicans, but there was no tension at my Thanksgiving table. But when I got back to work and I was talking to some of my white colleagues, there was a lot of tension, a lot of argument. And it got me thinking, it wasn't just political, it's just that there's this concept when you're talking about racism. I think that there needs to be some work done by white brothers and sisters to be able to talk about that in their churches, in their workplaces, and their
that's
schools.
100% right. And the one thing that I said I've been disappointed at is that many people have not been stepping up. I'm not going to mention any names because I don't like calling out people if it's in positivity, but there are a lot of people, my friends in State College, people that drank with me, that studied with me, that know that I, teach and I research in critical race theory, that, haven't really been talking about this, haven't been stepping up for some reason. At the George Washington University, at the graduate school, we're having a critical race conference next Wednesday. I'll send the information, Terry. You can send it out to your audience. Absolutely. I invited no less than 5-6 scholars that didn't feel comfortable talking about this topic. People that have published stuff with critical race theory in it that all of a sudden said that, I don't feel comfortable with this. And it's because, listen, and I'll put it out there that there are people, Black people, my mentors, that, I've always had critical race theory in my bio, that before the controversy have asked me to take it out. Jobs that I've applied for that have asked me to tone it down, and I just haven't because I know how important it is. What we need right now is for white people to understand that you need to step up at this point. You understand? You don't need to be a critical race theory expert, but you've been in this call, you've heard it. You can click on the links, and we need you to be as verbose and as critical in the defense of maybe not critical race theory. Maybe, even after this hour, you still quite don't understand what it is. You understand what it's not. But in the defense of anti-racism in the curriculum at every level of the school. However you want to do that. You could do it without ever using the word critical race theory. You could do that by still being an opponent of critical race theory. But there are not enough voices that say, what you're saying is incorrect. Here's the truth. And I'm not going to let you shout me down. We're really in America in a point that, at the end of the day, the loudest voices are winning. The loudest voices are winning in COVID vaccine mandates. The loudest voices are winning in so many policies. And we need to go back to a little bit of truth.
I that's interesting. So first of all, if you want to see what Dwayne's talking about, if you watch the episode that he was on last time in his bio, it mentioned that your area of research, one of your areas of research was in critical race theory. So you've been talking about this
for years. Since that, Victor Romero and Carla Pratt, who I'm sure you used to work with. In fact, we met at an event put on by
Now,
who's the dean of
Carla. I think Carla might be watching actually. She did.
Since they whispered the word critical race theory in my ear, and when I was a 1L in 2012 at what was then the Dickinson Schools of Law, I've been on it and I haven't looked back since, and I haven't been afraid. You understand? And I have white friends. I have people that are very close to me that, quite frankly, are white conservatives that still have to hear me and still have to see my Facebook post and still have to know my activism. And they know I'm not racist. And because they're against CRT, I don't think that they're racist. You understand? Let's just, if we're going to have a debate about an issue, let's just be honest about what we're really debating at. And the debate right now on CRT is just not an honest one. Unfortunately, it's just not
right. Well, you know what, brother? We could talk about CRT, like you said, maybe a couple of hours. But I think that you gave our folks watching, who are still hanging with us again, watching with us, you gave some great information. I think I see there's a comment about the links. After this episode, I will go back and repost the links to make sure they work. And if you RSVP'd to this show, I will send out the body of information that Dr. Dwayne has shared with me at the beginning of this. So if you RSVP'd, or if you want to get the information, you should go and RSVP to make sure you get the email about the links
And you can become a member of Strategies for Change. It's only $40 for the year. Terry ain't gonna plug it, but I'll plug it. It gets a lot of awesome stuff. You'll be able to fund change. Is it tax deductible yet?
Not yet. I mean, we'll probably get there soon.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
But you know, I absolutely love this conversation. So Dwayne, again, you've been on the show before. You know that I always ask the same question to every guest, and I'm going to make a little twist here because I think it's important that you make this message regarding CRT. So with that said, Dwayne, what is your message to America in regards to CRT?
Don't live in fear. Do not live in fear. America, if you're listening, fear is an emotion that demotivates rather than motivates. Do your own research. You don't have to take my word for it. Look at more things. But at the end of the day, let's not motivate each other by fear. Let's, embrace a radical version of love, which says that we're all human, regardless of our skin color, our skin tone, the religion we have, our sexual orientations, our identities. I think that there is a certain segment of the population in America, yes, on both sides, but not equally on both sides, that want to divide us, that want to take certain niche issues and make them issues for themselves, really just preserve their own power. And I think that we should reject that. I think that we should embrace truth. We should embrace knowledge. And more than anything else, do not live in fear. Claim your truth. Be brave, be courageous. Again, do your research. And if you have any questions, we can also post amongst those links my faculty page. You could just Google me at this point, Dwayne Wright, and I'm here to help you. I'm willing to come to your organization and have an event. I'm willing to participate in any debate with anyone on these issues. But more than anything else, don't live in fear. Live in love, y'all. Live in love. Live in love. I think that's what I would say.
And that's fantastic. And I did post a link to your faculty page. And I got to say this too. I've had the pleasure of seeing you present twice. And I would say that if you want anyone to speak, obviously on critical race theory, but the other thing that I love is your presentation on. And I always mess this up. Is the
first and the 14th Amendments. So just a little plug. The only reason that Penn State is notorious for this, that the Pennsylvania state has to allow some students to do hate speech is because the 14th Amendment, which was passed to give equality to the slaves. The Bill of Rights still does not apply to the states. It only applies to the states because of the 14th Amendment. This is a critical part of my legal scholarship. I've been doing some writing on this. If anyone wants to talk about it, I just accepted an invitation. We're going to talk about it at the University of San Francisco. But I won't go too deep because it's more for a legal audience. But I think, Terry, it's a pretty good argument. I would love to.
I think it's for the legal audience. But I've seen it twice. I saw it at the conference, and I saw it again when I invited you to do it for our space. And the one thing that I would say about that presentation is your ability to get people thinking about it that otherwise think they may know the answer, but you pull them back and forth. And I think that's what is needed more and more. So I will put a plug in for you, by the way. So if anyone wants to have that conversation about the first versus the 14th, Dr. Dwayne does an amazing presentation.
Now, just put out, I'm not sure I could speak about that in states that have banned CRT. Because it's so amorphous, these bans, that you don't know what they're banning. It could be anything, you understand? Which is probably why it's void for vagueness, but I'll leave that again for a more legal audience.
Well, I don't see any more questions in our comment box. I see a lot of thank yous. And so
happy to stay on for overtime if necessary, like last time. But, thank you, Terry, for this opportunity. This is a immensely important topic. I know that even the State College School District, my understanding, has been dealing with this. So shout out to the people back in Happy Valley. If anyone has any questions that they couldn't answer here, please feel free to email. But thank you, Terry, for the platform. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, what I'll say is Dwayne has offered the after party, and you know what? The after party, we got a good number of folks still logged on with us right now. So this is a time where I will end the show officially, but we're going to keep it rolling for an extra 15 minutes for just Q&A. So if you have questions, this is your time to submit it. And we're going to have an after party. You know what's funny? I don't have my after party banner up anymore. I used to have a banner. It's an after party. I gotta put it up now so people know what we're doing here.
Yeah, we
right?
can do it. No,
So,
thank you for those that need to go. I know it was just an hour. Thank you for showing up. But for those that can stay, we definitely appreciate it.
All right, so let's take a quick break, Dwayne, and then let's come back for the after party. How about that?
No problem. Thank you.
All right, here we go.
Tell us what you really mean, ma'am.
Law enforcement officers should be role models, period. If you can't be a mentor, you shouldn't have that uniform.
I could take a break from this world.
All my blinders are taken off. I can see what you guys are talking about. Y'all don't see what we're talking about yet. Policing is the law enforcement arm of systemic racism.
Well, the message for America is that they need to wake up. We need to stop the repeat. We need to stop the revolving door. And we need to come up with better ways of law enforcement. Criminal justice reform needs to reflect what it is. Ain't no way in the world somebody should be sitting in jail with a $1 bail for months.
I just wanna be free, finally.
All right, the after party, man.
Um,
All right, so folks, this is all Q&A, all Q&A. So if you got questions, comments, this is the time to ask those questions. I see there's one, I think this is a comment here. Thank you, Sean. First of all, much respect to Sean, who's backstage, who's popping these questions up for us.
thank you, Sean.
So, yeah, my college had students reenact enslavement and colonization in history courses. Was going to make the models, but students protest that. Oh.
And here's the thing, because of our weird free speech laws, even though I think that is just outrageous, has no pedagogical purpose, that might be protected where critical race theory is not, right? So, one of the things we need to talk about, Terry, is first and foremost, what do we really mean by free speech, right? Do we mean consequence-free speech for certain people, or do we really mean free speech? If we really mean free speech, how can you ban anything, any idea, that is, abhorrent to you? But, again, certain people want to embrace this. They want to say, no, you're canceling me, when people are accused of sexual assault and they get fired from their job. But at the same point, they're trying to cancel critical race theory. So, I think that, we need a more robust defense of maybe not critical race theory, but the fact that you should not be, canceling and going against academic freedom from colleges. You understand? Right. I understand he's retiring, and I'm not sure because I haven't been as in tune, but where is President Barron's statement on the fact that we shouldn't be banning critical race theory? You understand? Because this is a slippery slope. The first step is, attacking academic freedom, and then they can ban subjects, then they could ban tenure, then they could teach you what to teach in the classroom. You understand? So I would hope we could have a more robust defense of true free speech.
So there's another comment here, and I think this really goes back to this guilty, feeling guilty, and what have you not. But there's two parts. Going back to my op-ed that I never actually submitted for publication.
You gotta submit that, bro.
I do. So there were two parts to it. One was guilt, and the other one was this idea of a wedge, right? I had this part of the statement I mentioned was, I've never felt a wedge learning history. right? So if I was to tell you about my history, why would I create a wedge for you?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I like, so for me, give you a great example, another good example, using the president George Washington. And I remember the first argument, the first quote unquote trouble I got into in school was in history class, where the history teacher called him the father of the country, the father of our country, which is a typical name that he has.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take that from him either. But I also know that from my perspective, I also know about people like Only Judge, right? Or Hercules, who was his slave. So for me, I said, well, he might be the father of the country to some, but for folks like in the narratives of Only Judge, again, another great book out there, definitely read it. It tells a different narrative.
Yeah.
And Only Judge.
That's 100% true, man. That's 100% true. He's the father of a certain country.
Yeah.
He's the father of a country that, quite frankly, we no longer inhabit, and we no longer want to inhabit, right?
Yeah.
He understands he's the father of a country where you and I would consider 3/5 of a person. And that was a compromise. He's the father of the country. Barack Obama couldn't even graduate from Harvard Law School, much less have been president. You understand? And I think, to Kate's point, guilt in and of itself is not a bad thing, right? We use guilt all the time. A kid doesn't do their homework, they get an F. Hopefully the social pressure and guilt makes them do the homework again so they can learn, right? The guilt that right now is being used is we're trying to tell people your kids are going to go home and they're going to come back and they're going to think that they're bad just for being white. They're going to think that, the country is inherently racist. And that's not what critical race theory teaches. What it teaches is that there is such a thing called white privilege. You can look it up. The article is called Cheryl Harris, Whiteness is Property. And that the country at its core, and here's the really key part, the country's laws are endemic on racism because they were developed by people, maybe not intentionally, but lived and were educated at a time where Black people were considered inferior. And we think that is racist. Now, if you don't think Black people being inferior is racist, I've got nothing to tell you. I think Kate's last point, because, all the time was supposed to be for questions, is, I understand why white parents would feel uncomfortable. And I do too. You understand? Here's the thing. I have no kids right now. And if my kids are coming home and saying, Mommy, I saw a video today and you're a bad person, as kids are prone to do.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
I think that would be a problem. So we do need to be careful. When we say culturally responsive teaching, it's just not culturally responsive to African Americans, it's culturally responsive to every student that's in your classroom. You understand? Right. So I wouldn't necessarily, in teaching about the Holocaust, go dress up as Hitler in any classroom, but especially a classroom where a kid's parents might be Jewish. You understand? Right. So why would I teach inaccurate history to African Americans? Why would I teach that the Civil War wasn't about slavery? Why would I not mention things like we've got it so bad to the point where Ruby Bridges, the young lady that integrated the Little Rock, her book is about to be banned in Arkansas under the guise of critical race theories bans. You understand? So again, what I think white parents need to be afraid of is inaccurate history, which does not prepare your students for success in this world.
Right. And I absolutely agree. One of the cool things about being able to tell accurate history, and again, accurate history is just not just this one-sided perspective on an event, right? So the cool thing about being able to tell history, true history, is that it doesn't bring a wedge between people. I think it brings people together. Like, I mentioned this before, like, if I'm presenting on a topic that, like CRT, for example, and I'm telling a narrative, it could be about Moses or battle, for example. To me, I'm telling that narrative not to drive a wedge, it's to provide an understanding, right, of what their narratives were in law enforcement and why that's important today. I also think with the guilt part, it's needed. It is needed because I said if your kid feels guilty about something, that could be a good thing because maybe you're parenting right. Maybe you got a really good kid who has empathy, right?
Who's not
Empathy.
going to repeat those same mistakes. Like,
Exactly.
if your kid truly went home and did something, which kids are prone to do. Mommy, I took a lollipop. Wouldn't you want your kid to feel guilty about that? But here is the real key, Terry. We in America, and I am American too, so I really do mean we, are so obsessed with individualism that we are not willing to place blame on anyone for anything.
Right.
So what these anti-racist advocates are really saying is, I don't want Tommy to feel guilty for something that I have no responsibility for, which is not true. You understand? Right. You have no responsibility where you're paying Tommy's private school tuition with a home equity loan in a house that you have that was denied to someone else in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, because when we came back from World War II and a GI Bill, certain people could get homes, white people, and get FHA loans where black people couldn't. And you think you have no responsibility to that. And they say, well, that was so many years ago. At what point we want to take responsibility and credit for everything that America has done historically? Oldest constitution, oldest democracy. That's us. And the things that we haven't done, somehow we want to take no responsibility for. Well, I tell you what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We cannot have it both ways. If the great things that came out of America from 1776, really from 1619 on, are the responsibility of Americans and really show us how great the country is, shouldn't we also collectively take responsibility for the bad things as well and for correcting them?
And again, to me, that's the story of America. That's what you should be proud of. Like, I think about it in terms of like, working out, right? You put your body through some tension, right? In order to progress what you're trying to progress.
Move forward.
Right. And so if you talk to anyone about this concept of racism in America, any good that comes out of America is about the progression of America. It's not about America wasn't this land that, came and was great and this greatness from the get-go. It's the progression, right? It's progression over time. So by ignoring the narratives of, and again, we're talking about race, but this is any kind of identity, gender or LGBT or immigrant status. Ability.
Let me clarify one myth. I think some people think that CRT says that, we haven't gone far or we haven't made any progress whatsoever. And that's not true. That's the myth. CRT doesn't say that we haven't made any progress. It says that we haven't got where you think we've gone. We have made progress. Terry, you and I are educated folk that at one point, worked for or worked at the Pennsylvania's, the flagship school of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's progress from, where our ancestors were, well, mine were probably back in Trinidad, but, where your ancestors were just 100 years ago. But the question is, clearly we haven't gone far enough. And there's no better example of that than the George Floyd incident.
Yes.
We understand that there has been progress. We want to acknowledge that, but we still have a world's way to go. And don't, I think Malcolm X said, you can't stab me in the back 6 inches, take it out 3 inches and call it progress. You actually have to take it out and mend the wound. And we all, black, white, or indifferent, have to do the work to mend the wounds. And that's what these anti-racist people are just unwilling to do.
Yep. Well, I want to say, okay, we are definitely past our after party time, brother. I know we got folks still logged in, but again, I thank you all for sticking out. Dwayne, if you can stay on for a couple more minutes at the end of this, I just want to chat with you. But everybody, thank you for tuning in, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.